Thank you to our guests from Yeti Software for appearing on this episode of NetGain. Use promo code NetGain for 1 month free of Yeti Software if you're trying it out. That's promo code NetGain for 1 month free. NetGain, networking, encouragement, and training. Brought to you by Jack of All People Trades, helping snow and landscape companies recruit, train, and retain the best employees. Okay, welcome to NetGain. This is Networking, Encouragement, Training. I'm your host, Evan Tashwire from Jack of All People Trades. We exist to help snow, landscape, and small businesses find, recruit, develop, and then ultimately retain the best employees. So we're looking to build those win-win workplaces where employees are engaged in their strengths and thriving, and your business is thriving because of that. I'm excited for today's episode as we move toward the spring here. I have a returning guest, actually one of the first returning guests for NetGain, Bart Huber from Yeti Software. So Bart, if you want to introduce/reintroduce yourself to the NetGain audience.
Yeah, thanks for having me on again, Evan. I appreciate it. Glad I didn't burn the opportunity last time. I work with Yeti Software in sales. Yeti's been around now for about, I think, 7 or 8 years in the software space for snow removal contractors and also lawn care and landscaping companies. So happy to be on. Excited to talk today.
Perfect. So yeah, let's get into, we're moving, this will be coming out here in later March. So we're moving toward from snow season to landscape season. So it's kind of give an overview. I know you talked, and I encourage all my listeners to go back and listen to the first episode that Bart and I did. He gives a lot of overview of Yeti for snow, but kind of talk about how Yeti can help really from the landscape side, or maybe that contractor doing both.
Yeah, especially if you're doing both. I mean, there's some it's like inside baseball stuff that I guess I won't really go over right now. But there's some minor adjustments you can make within the platform each season to kind of make that a less daunting process. Because obviously, not only are the tasks different, incredibly different, but so is the urgency. In snow management, it would be great if you could schedule things out. You just can't. But for lawn care and landscaping, you do have a little bit more flexibility to actually time out some of the processes and tasks that are being completed. So we give you some tools to be able to do that. There are tools on Yeti that many of our users who are only doing snow removal or only using Yeti for snow removal right now probably have not even used, just because they're really not applicable, but they are built more for lawn care and landscaping. So there's some stuff there that they can do. There's also some job costing tools that we've added in. So in your off season, whichever it may be, whether that's for snow or for landscaping, you can kind of go back and have a retroactive look to see where you did or did not make money. Hopefully you always made money, but that will be there along with labor costing to see about how much that was. Additionally, we've got tools that you can use in the shoulder seasons, to do your preseason and postseason inspections. On snow removal sites, for instance, you want to be able to prove whether or not you were the one who damaged those curbs or if that was there before you got there, and vice versa. If you show up to a site, you have a new landscaping contract, and there's just a ton of damage to the irrigation system that you were not responsible for, that you did not touch, that was just there previously. Those are things that you want to document and you want to make sure you're noting. So we've got tools for that as well.
Really cool. So yeah, it sounds like you got a lot of good tools. You said from the job costing side, which I think is really big because from a people
Yeah,
side, while I specialize in people, I always say there's not mission without margin. And for you to invest in
right.
people, invest in the best employees, invest in things like software, like Yeti, like, symposiums like SIMA, Snow Alliance, all these kind of things, that takes having the right margins. And it also help you kind of see where your ideal customer is, because an ideal customer is one that's educated on that and understanding why you're using the tools. You're not just, adding bells and
Yeah.
whistles for the sake of. But I think a good thing to really speak the client's language, and I'll kind of get your feedback on that, is obviously, everything comes back to the client. People buy for their reasons, not ours. So, how do you see some of what Yeti can do, maybe with like the pre and post season inspections and other things, really being able to speak to clients about how we provide a higher quality of service, and here's why.
Well, I probably have a sort of biased way of approaching everything from a sales perspective. But I think in services, especially contract services, and what I mean by that is services that are more than one-offs. Um, like if you were to, I had a plumber at my house earlier this week. That service was a one-off service, and it was not, it was more than I'd want to pay, but it was not super expensive. Um, the services that Yeti users and anyone in snow removal or landscaping are providing, seasonally, these could be thousands and thousands of dollars. Even to get a commercial lawn care contract, it's several $1,000s. So the more those services costs and the longer they last, I think it requires by nature more education for the client. And by being able to do preseason and postseason inspections, you're able to educate and show your work. That can be, obviously, there are times when a client can pay for that, for an inspection, but it can also be used as a great sales tool um, on its face. But then on the back end, it can also be used as a great liability mitigation tool. You're showing a service that you really need to be doing anyway. You want to know exactly what is wrong with a property before you dive into it. I know, like, the real estate market was so insane a few years ago that people were buying homes without even doing an inspection. But that aside, I only mention it because if one of your listeners has bought a home in a short period, they may not be familiar with it. But, like, you want to do the inspection. You want to get the inspection. You want to know exactly what you're getting into. There's the price of the service or the home, but there's also the price of everything that's going to have to go into it once you occupy the home. So once you're getting that contract, you have an idea of what needs to be done. You have a 5-step fertilizer plan. You need to mow 28 times throughout the season. You got a spring cleanup and a fall cleanup. But what's wrong with the property? What's damaged before you even get there? What did the last contractor do incorrectly that you're now going to have to make up for? And how is that going to cost you? If you just charge that to a client after the fact, you're kind of already getting off on a bad foot. If the client knows that all of these things are wrong going into the contract, they then have the option to either have you fix them, or you're starting off on the right foot saying, all right, look, I'm not going to pay you an extra $50,000 right off the bat, but I at least understand that all of these things need to be addressed at some point. We don't have the expenditure right now to be able to just fix them all, but understood that these are not your problems and this liability won't fall back on you. So you're automatically setting up trust with your client by doing some of those things. I think that's really important, especially today when everyone's trying to find some sort of an edge. You can't just show up and say, I'm going to cut your grass anymore. So I would always encourage to do an inspection, whether you're charging for it or not.
Yeah, definitely. I think, the big word you said there was trust. I actually had wrote it down like right before you said it, but I think that's really important because from a people side, especially relational sales, it really does come down to trust. So being able to prove your work, or even like you said, when you come into that new property, if that irrigation system's damaged, the
Yeah.
hardscapes or the lawns, there's certain issues you can show from the beginning. And it's like, hey, look, I'm not showing you to necessarily say you got to fix all this now. You can, here's what the cost would be, but we want to, how do we get to an ideal state together? So I think building that trust, and then also building the trust too, they always say trust but verify. Software gives you that chance to verify
Yeah.
what you're putting out there as far as trust.
Well, and another thing I've seen just across not necessarily specifically in snow and landscaping, but in services as a whole, I think there is an erosion of trust from the consumer. They're seeing prices go up and they don't necessarily know why. Um, just about every service that can be done at a home or on a commercial property has gotten much more expensive over the last few years. And the client doesn't for sure understand exactly why that may be. And I think there is a kind of a undertone in the market that clients are being extorted. That's obviously not the case. What's lacking here, though, is some education to the client. There is big opportunity in exterior maintenance right now to provide education to the client. There are a lot of folks out there who just don't fully understand why things cost what they do now. Um, and they're having a hard time justifying some of these increases. And the bad news for contractors who have to continue to fight for these contracts is that if you can't justify the increase, the contractor is likely not going to be making nearly enough money to continue to be operational. So the more education we can provide the buyer, the better it's going to be for the industry as a whole.
Yeah, 100%. And, that is a tough situation because, nobody likes to, like you said, most people aren't raising prices for the sake of raising prices.
Right,
Materials have
exactly.
gotten more expensive.
Yeah.
Inflation in society's gotten more expensive, meaning wages have had to go up. All those kind of things correspond with each other. So it is important to kind of, I think I said it on either our last broadcast or others about like, us against the storm. I think this is another, well, it's not snow necessarily, it's another us against the storm
Sure.
mentality we got to have with us and the clients coming together and saying, all right, look, we know there's inflation, we know prices are up, it's hitting you, it's hitting us. How do we best collaborate to still give you that quality, still understand, and we're not raising prices for the sake of, but we also, as the quality contractor, don't want you to just go with lesser quality and then you're going to have problems later, which you might call it to dig us out of. And, that dig out is going to be more expensive than if we had dealt with things on a proactive schedule.
Yeah. And anytime prices increase, it's only going to get more competitive. And I think one of the best competitive advantages you can have is trust. I mean, especially in software, like where we are, there are so many people who have been burned by inadequate software. And I'm not going to like run anyone down, but you need to trust the people you're buying from as things continue to get more expensive. So yeah, it looks bad on the surface, but there's a massive opportunity there if you can work that into your sales flow and really into your company philosophy of transparency and trust. You're going to be a better contractor.
Definitely. And I think, talking about education, I mean, that's from a training
Yeah.
perspective is huge to me. It's what I'm really about. But one thing I heard as this is a good takeaway for any company is, one thing you can do with your clients as we get toward that end of winter, beginning of spring is offer some free lunch and learns. Because you have to think from their perspective, from, any company, people are looking for professional development, especially the younger generations, your millennials, your Gen Zs, which really isn't younger anymore. It's, mid 40s and down for millennials at
Yeah.
this point, about mid 20s, the later 20s down for Gen Z, are looking for professional development at work. So that means your clients are looking for that professional development as property managers, facility managers, building owners. So to be able to educate them on, what are some things to watch out with the landscape, what are them, also be able to educate at the same time. So you're giving them that value. And that's actually something on my side that I'm working on too with, some of the trainings I do can kind of be repackaged as that, not necessarily on the direct facilities education, but on the soft skills of communication. And really where I see the win-win in that is if I'm doing a communication training, say for Yeti or for a landscape contractor or snow contractor, it's given them education on business communication or leadership that they can use for their company, but it's also something they can invite their property managers to because communication, leadership, interviewing, that kind of stuff's universal in any kind of
Yeah,
business. So, kind of thoughts on
exactly.
the lunch and learn model, and if you guys ever use something like that.
We don't. I do think, especially when you're able to contract fairly locally, it's a great tool. Um, Good, bad, or otherwise, I talk with people and work with people all over North America. So that the lunch and learn thing does not quite bode well for me, just because there's like obvious geographic constraints. But no, I think it's a great tool. There's an old sales book, ironically called New Strategic Selling. It's about 400 pages long, so I'll save you the time and just say that the whole point is you need to be building relationships with people and gaining trust. That is, especially when you're selling high ticket items. And these services are priced in a way that they are high ticket items, whether you think of it that way or not. I mean, it's fairly easy to get in the mindset, especially when you're, like let's say, you're mostly doing tree removal and in the summer months. If you're doing residential tree removal, that can be kind of a turn and burn thing. You go from one to the next, but the price of that service is high enough to where you probably need to be gaining some relationship equity with someone. You need to get referrals. You're going to likely get all of your business from referrals, or the majority of it anyway. So by doing a lunch and learn in your area, no matter what your service is, especially for these higher ticket items, you're number one, creating a touch point between you and a client. And there's plenty of research out there that says how many touch points you need to get with a client before they even consider your options. But you're also giving yourself a great opportunity to, people are chewing, they're listening, they're not talking. So you're giving yourself a really nice opportunity to discuss your offering and also why it's different, and to answer questions about the service itself, not necessarily about your company. I think it's really easy to get into a rhythm of just what we would call showing up and throwing up, where you're just talking about what you do. But by doing a lunch and learn, you're kind of creating an environment to where people feel a little bit more confident to ask questions, almost as like a mob mentality, where they're okay with lobbing questions at you that may kind of test your knowledge and test your ability to handle some of those objections. So the conversation, if you find that it's going toward not necessarily why do you solve the problem, but just problems in general around the work that you do, that's actually great. You're now becoming the industry expert to these folks. So yeah, if you have the opportunity, if you work in a single geographic area, or if you have branches in multiple geographic areas where you can pool people together and bring them in and do an in-person lunch and learn, that's a fantastic opportunity. And the ROI on something like that is so high that you really don't need a ton of people to show up to make that worth it. I think a lot of folks would probably look at that and say, man, I'd like to get 60 people to show up. Well, if 5 show up, you have 5 potential buyers who are now going to be, much more likely to use your services than they would otherwise.
Yeah, I think that's really good summary, and definitely the challenge I can understand with the remote thing. A remote, you can always look at, you can offer things remote like this. I know remote is always a little tougher maybe
Yeah.
to show up. You don't have the same in person.
Oh yeah.
You can always send, you can always do the gifting too, the
Certainly.
gift cards and whatever
Yeah.
to the clients, and then say, hey, we'd like to join you for lunch, but either way, we want to bless you with this is good. I'd say kind of the too long didn't read of this episode. So I'll definitely clip this for like a YouTube short here and, some LinkedIn promo. But I'd say the too long didn't read so far has been trust and relationships are key to sales.
Yeah.
So as we move, the landscape season, talk about, kind of what Yeti can do, or what anybody can do, trust and relationships is like the 2 big takeaways that I've taken.
Yeah.
And one thing I wanted to follow up with you on, you talked about how many touch points it takes to, really be considered for, as somebody who they'd approach as a potential, vendor. So from your experience or research, how many touch points is it ballpark? And then also what is considered a touch point? So is a touch point like physically, like this conversation is a touch point, or can a touch point be them seeing you on LinkedIn, them hearing about you from somebody?
Yeah.
So I guess how many and what counts as touch points?
Well, let's define a touch point first. I think that's the best place to start. A touch point can be the reception of an email. It can be and an email that they actually read, by the way, which depending on, if you use a CRM, you can get some data around who actually read or did not read the email that you sent. So just sending out a whole bunch of email doesn't necessarily solve the problem. A touch point can also be a phone call. A touch point can be a meeting. It can be, the lunch and learn. I would say that's a meeting. I would call that a meeting. It's, I think, best defined as a reference to your company and your offering. So it's a fairly weak touch point, but let's say you had a billboard on a highway. Technically, that can be defined as a touch point if someone looks up and sees it every day. I don't think that's as impactful of a touch point. That is literally a touch where a face-to-face conversation might be more of a punch. But yeah, now as far as how many touch points do you need before someone considers your offering, whatever it may be, I think now everything's changing so rapidly at the moment, and especially the way that people buy. We can talk about that a little bit if you'd like, but the consensus was, most recently 7 touch points is kind of what somebody needs to even consider whatever it is that you're selling. Um, like I mentioned, the way people buy is changing very rapidly. It's done more and more um, through their own search, which is why it's going to unfortunately probably become more important that your search is optimized for AI and not necessarily just for search engines, which is a bummer because, again, that's a quick change. SEO was all the rage a couple of years ago, and that's very quickly shifting.
Yeah, so a lot of good takeaways there, I think, from anybody on the sales side is, touch points. I like how you kind of differentiated the touch versus punch or like high impact. So like, the conversations we're having now, is higher impact. If we see each other at SIMA, if we have
Sure.
a phone call, an email that people read, especially anything personal is higher touch versus, seeing a LinkedIn post or video or a billboard. It's like it's a touch point, but it's not as heavy of a touch point as a conversation or someone stopping by your booth and really engaging with you and asking some questions. So and I like the 7 number, and as I know with anything, nothing's a magic number. It's not like some people might be at the point where they only need 1 because they're really in need and they're, like you said, they're looking, so
Yeah.
one good one
And
might
it's going to, I suppose it will matter what market you're in, what service you're providing. If you provide a very niche service, it's not going to be too tough. The work itself might be very tough, but
yeah.
to sell a person in your area who needs that job done, if you're the only game in town, there's a good chance they're going to have the opposite problem where you can't answer the phone fast enough and it's just going to keep ringing all day long. I spoke with a guy over the weekend, actually, who owns a fencing company.
Mm.
And he said to me that some days he just wants to throw his phone in the river because it won't stop ringing. And that's because he's really the only guy who does fencing in the area where I live, or a certain type of fencing anyway. So, if you have a business like that, the touch point game is not going to be quite as important. But when we're talking about services like snow removal and lawn care and landscaping, you'd be very hard pressed to be the only game in town. So even though you may not like it, it may not be the most fun thing you do, you may be a guy who really just wants to do the work in the field. It is a game that you have to play if you want to continue to stay busy.
Yeah, no, and I'll admit I asked that one a little bit selfishly too for my own learning because as training, I have to think about from a training consulting, like, do I believe people are the most important thing in your business? Absolutely, but
Yeah.
I also realistically know that stuff like I do is not necessarily a fire of the day, so it can get put on the back burner if people aren't
Sure.
intentional about it. So, kind of thinking from that perspective of staying relevant and in front of things, but kind of shifting the convo, back to, Yeti. And really, as we shift toward landscape season, you kind of talked a little bit, but anything else you'd share on really how software can help with that transition season to season? You mentioned the, postseason inspections, documenting what had happened, go into that next season, but anything else people can really optimize with software on this seasonal transition?
Yeah, I would say the one thing, well, it would depend on what you're doing outside of the lawn care and landscaping season. But if you're doing something that complements it well enough, meaning you're going to be using the same teams, and you're going to be using a lot of the same equipment. For instance, snow removal, you may be using the same trucks to haul trailers that are going to be using to plow parking lots. You're going to be using the same crews. Granted, there may be a few guys that only do one or the other, but by and large, you're going to be using the same teams, especially if you're doing it in-house. And even if you're subcontracting everything, you may also be using the same contractors, for each service. Using one tool is going to make the process a heck of a lot easier on you, if you are in the office or if you're hybrid in the office and in the field. It's one less thing that you need to train a team to do. And the thing that you'll see happen, even if you are so just absolutely dead set on using two separate things, inevitably, regardless of whatever those two things are, your crew will come back with the feedback they like option one over option two. Then they will whine about it, and it will become a complaint. So it's, I hate to say we're just like, trying to eliminate a complaint, but it is the elimination of a complaint. Like, they will prefer one over the other. So be prepared for that, because you will get pushback then if they prefer one over the other. So using just one tool year round can really be helpful for your crew and for you. You're going to be familiar with the back office tools. Generally, it does take a full season. We see it all the time with Yeti. People will sign up and they'll use about half of the full capability of the first season. That's not uncommon. And that's not a Yeti, problem. That's a software problem, that people want to do the main thing first and then build out from there, because they feel comfortable getting their main objective kind of taken care of. But as you continue to use a software platform, and if you do it year round, you don't need the refreshers. You don't need to go into extra additional training just to remember how to do something that you did last year. You're using it year round, and you're getting more and more comfortable with the tools, with the reporting, and you're better able to make it work for you and your operation the way you want your operation to work.
Yeah, definitely. So a couple things I heard there was, one, the consistency of tool really helps every user with it because you're familiar with one tool. So, being able to use the same tool. And I never thought about that. If you use different tools for different things, the crew might kind of almost, I don't want to say mutiny, but like you said, they'll be like, I don't like this tool. I want this tool. Why can't we use this for both? So you being able to use the same for both
Yeah.
eliminates that source of discontentment. And from an employee side, I mean, one of the foundations of engagement, I always, say, and this is Gallup research, is I have the materials and equipment needed to do my job. So if they don't feel they have good tools, or in tool overload, that actually can create disengagement. That actually has been shown research wise to be the leading factor of disengagement, is having bad tools. So bad
Yeah.
software falls under that, or too much software overload to the point where
Right.
you don't, even want to use it because it's like there's too much. So I think that rollout. So, that kind of gets into, you talked about the team members. Um, how would you advise a team? Let's say, I have a company, I really like what Yeti's got, but I have a field crew that I got to think about, operations managers, snow and landscape side, irrigation. How do I get them to buy in, or what are some things I should think about even when I'm buying, and how to include maybe their feedback, not just get them to buy in as tell them, but how can I get their feedback too to build that trust and buy-in?
Well, that's a great question. So now you're kind of in a role where you are not only a buyer, because you've admitted that you have some sort of a problem. So now you're a buyer. You need to go find a tool that solves your problem. But you also now have to be a salesperson to the rest of your team, because we can go ahead and assume that they're not all going to be thrilled. I think it's okay to admit, even in my position, I have to admit sometimes, like, we are solving problems, but we're also providing another tool. Like, there is a guy in the field who has to use the platform, and it's got to be as simple as possible for him, because we want to create as little friction as possible. So you have to make sure, first and foremost, that the tool that you're vetting is going to solve your problem. Because if it's not going to solve your problem, even if your crew in the field is happy, it really doesn't matter. If it's not going to be used properly, or if it is used properly and it still doesn't solve the problem, then it doesn't matter. So just disregard it. So after we've gone through the process of finding a couple of tools that we like, that we think are going to solve our main problem, at that point, you need to get buy-in from your crews. And that sales process is not going to be unlike the sales process that you would go through with the client. You need to get the trust of your users in the field. And I think the best way to do that is explain to them what you're really after in this process. So if we look at snow management as an example, one of the biggest issues is liability mitigation. And I think a lot of times the user in the field does not have a window into that world at all. You can tell folks, like, hey, this isn't safe, or what you're doing right now isn't great because of this reason or that reason. And if some old lady slips and falls, it's always the old lady example that they use. If some old lady slips and falls, it's going to be on us. Well, that isn't necessarily a good enough breakdown for most folks. Personally, I wouldn't necessarily put two and two together and understand that you are paying a massive amount of money for insurance. And I wouldn't necessarily understand that we're two slip and falls away from not being an existing company anymore. So if you can explain to them how this works, if someone slips and falls, here's what happens. Here's how this process cascades into a minor headache during a storm to a massive problem for our company. I think they can then better understand why you're making them do this in the first place. For lawn care and landscaping, it's the same thing. Like, I don't have a window. We're servicing 200 sites a week. I do not have a window into every single site. I don't know what has or has not been hit. If I don't know that it's not been hit, I can't bill it. If I can't bill it, the company does not get paid. And if the company doesn't get paid, I can't employ everyone. So it's not necessarily just saying, hey, here's a new cool thing we're going to do instead of using paper. That doesn't necessarily provide enough impact for the user in the field to have buy-in. But if they fully understand the problem, they can often understand better, even though, again, they may not be thrilled still. I'm not saying by doing this, the person in the field is then going to say, oh, great. I'm stoked to be able to use this new thing. But they at least understand why they have to do it. So even if they do it a little bit begrudgingly, they're at least doing it because they know now that you are not just kind of trying to make their life more hectic.
Yeah, I think really good feedback there. So a couple things I heard was number one, like, so if you're looking for takeaways as a trainer, I always try to break down, throw a few out there to people listening from a professional development side. But from a takeaway, when you're buying software, it's got to solve the problem. So first of all, you have to, even before that, define the problem. You know what I mean?
Right.
No,
Exactly.
I love a mentor of mine and, leader, I've worked with, always would say, before, people would come with like solutions or different ideas, he'd say, what problem are you trying to solve? So I think starting
Yeah.
with that before you even go to buying software is, what problem are you trying to solve? And then, does it solve the problem, or are there other ways? Not to get off of software, because I know it's what we're talking about, but
No,
you
that's a
know
great point. I mean, that's with anything. If you can't define the problem, and it may take some pretty serious analysis. I mean, I talk to people very regularly, especially during months when it's actually snowing. So December, January, February, when the pain is so intense that will say, I don't really know what the problem is. I just know that this sucks. Like, this is just like, we're just having a really hard time. And, you ask enough questions, you figure out where the pain actually is. But do yourself a favor, though, and try to analyze that without being prompted, and try to really figure out what you're trying to solve here. Where are your shortcomings? Because it's okay to admit it. I mean, every single company in the world has its shortcomings. So
mhm.
figure out where they are before you go down a buying path. It's going to help you immensely, and honestly, probably save you some time. Like, if you, I'll just keep using a software demo as an example, but if you go on to a software demo with a salesperson and you tell them exactly what your problem is, they're going to be able to save you 15 or 20 minutes of time. So those aren't always a whole lot of fun to sit through. I get that. So if you want the most impactful presentation too, you really want to know what a tool or a platform does, know exactly what you need it to do before you go into it. And that can be a little difficult, I will admit that. But you can be doing yourself a huge favor by understanding exactly the problems you're trying to solve before you go into a situation.
100%. So yeah, understanding that problem, making sure the tool addresses it. But I think a key thing you said too, when it comes to the crew buy-in, is, you know, getting feedback from them in the process. And I personally am an advocate of having users in the process, from, times
Yeah.
I've bought software other places too, or looked at software, have users in it that are impacted. Even I've done the same thing with recruiting searches, is get feedback from people who are impacted, because then it shows that, because what you don't want to do is, okay, I solved this problem on the billing end, but I created this problem in the field that somebody could have maybe helped me spot if they were on a demo with me, or if they had given feedback in a way to say, hey, this isn't going to work. So I think getting that feedback from the right people, even, involving them in demos when it comes, having some reps. And I know that, sometimes in snow landscape world, it's like, well, I'm taking people out of the field. It's like, yes, temporarily you are, but you got to look at when you're buying a high ticket item like a software package, you want to have this impact long term. So yes, take that impact. And I think what you said too about the why, like sharing the reasons with your crew of why you're doing this, whether it's, hey, this is mitigation to take a slip and fall from, that could take us, out of business or raise our insurance unreasonably, to being able to be defended and thrown out because we have all the documentation. And that affects your payroll, that affects, your employment, your team's employment. And I think knowing that why, and also that gets to, I'm kind of going on the employee side a little bit here, but start with knowing your team's reasons for coming to work. If you know what your team is, in it for, whether they're working for their family, whether they want to advance their career, they just love your company and love their role. They want to be the steady Eddie that's, cutting grass, pushing snow, whatever it is, when you know those reasons, because when you know the reasons, then you can connect back with the why of, hey, look, I know you just want to push snow, and we want to keep you in a position to just push snow, but we obviously have to build a customer for this. So here's what
Yeah,
we're going to
right.
need from you. But we also want to hear from you. How can we make this as streamlined for you and provide you with enough resources that this isn't a headache, so that you can keep pushing snow and really have that two-way buy-in? So any thoughts on
Right.
that?
I think that's an excellent point. I mean, if you can, if you can do that, if you can provide those reasons to the folks in the field and also understand exactly why they're there, and that's going to put you. First of all, I'll just say there. I meet with a lot of folks who don't do that, and you can kind of tell that uh, some of these problems are brought on by themselves. Not all of them, certainly not all of them. But if you understand, if you have such a great understanding of why your customer needs your solution, you can also do the exact same thing with your own employees and understand exactly why they need this solution to work out just as much as you do. So if you understand their why, I think they're also going to, you know, people generally, if you show them some love and attention in that regard to understand who they are, how they operate, and what they're here for, they're going to notice that. I mean, that's not, it's such an easy thing to do, but it goes so far above and beyond what folks' typical experience is with an employer. Um, and it kind of goes back to what we were saying about getting buy-in from your team. I almost like don't want to say it out loud because it's just such like lowest common denominator stuff. But when people know that you have their best interests at heart, they're going to trust you more anyway. And if you're going through the work, when it's not even hard work, but if you're going through the work to actually understand why people are working for you, you're going to seem more like a human being than a boss. And that's what you need to be doing anyway. That's what you should be doing. It's what we all should be doing, is trying to see people on a human level. But man, it is just such a simple way to gain trust with your own crews and your own staff.
Absolutely. And man, that I might have to take that last point and run it into an episode itself on just valuing people as a human, because
Yeah, it's
we
just
could paint I could paint a series out of that, which is, really the human element. But just kind of as we close up here, Bart, anything else you want to share about Yeti relating to landscape season, anything new, floor's open to you.
well, if you are listening and you are interested, we do have a promo code. So if you use the code NetGain, you will get a month free on a Yeti subscription. I should say that before I forget it. And Nicole, who works in our marketing department, gets mad at me. But no, I mean it's all about consistency. You used the word earlier, and it's a good one. Whatever you're using, just try and use it as much as possible. I get that there are certainly certain circumstances where you need to use more than one tool. I understand that. And I mean, we've got clients who do stuff that is so different one season to the next that it becomes a necessity. But if you can stay consistent, you really are going to get much better results than you would if you just use a hodgepodge of tools all year long. So really consider that when you're making a buying decision. First, can I be consistent? And if the answer is yes, does this tool allow me to be consistent in using it year round? So if there is any interest, we're happy to talk with you. You can also sign up for a free account on yetisoftware.com just to have a look around and mess around with it and see what it does and how it acts. And you can schedule a demo. I'm willing to talk to anybody about, what our tools do and what they, how they work. So, feel free to do that. And again, if you do want to sign up, you can get a free month with promo code NetGain.
Promo code NetGain. I love it. So yeah, thank you for sharing about that. And I think that's really cool. And another thing, see, this is why episodes run long with me, because I just get so many ideas from people. But you did share about like the consistency, and I think that's same with tools and also even with people development. I think a challenge, I'll throw a final little takeaway out for everybody, is the challenge can be you feel a pain and you want to find something that's instantly going to relieve that pain. You know what I mean? And so then you go out and it's like, well, this software has this feature, so I'll buy this. Well, then I have
Yeah.
this software will, or I need to hire this person to do this. Whereas I would encourage to maybe think longer term, play the longer game. And like you said, on the software side, really become a student of it and a student of your processes to say, how can, Yeti really help solve problems? And how can we become more a student of the reports rather than running to another software because, oh, they have this report? It's like, well, let's get in there and see what reports do they have, and also what can we do with the information? How can we become better students? Same thing with people. I always say the brightest diamond's the one you polish, and the you being your company, you as a leader. So I think, if you're invested over time and not looking for always quick fix after quick fix, obviously emergencies, yes, you have to have quick fixes in emergencies. But if you are willing to, maybe, I like how Thane Isaac says, and ironic, I have the fire shirt on, let the controlled burn go for a little bit, where it's like, okay, we're not going to try to put the whole fire out. We're going to try to control it for now. And we're slowly over time going to work with this tool to see how we mitigate it. And then maybe also in the future, how we use this tool to not start a fire in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at it like physical pain, it can sometimes be the difference between taking a painkiller and going to a physical therapist. I mean, one's going to knock out that pain pretty much immediately. The other one, you're going to have to do these little, what I'll call like grandma exercises that are almost embarrassing at your house for, 3 months, but it's going to eliminate the problem altogether. It's just going to take much longer and it's not going to be immediate. But if you take the time to do it, you're going to actually solve the problem.
I love that. It's a great one to close on. So this has been Bart Huber from Yeti Software, Evan Tashwire from Jack of All People Trades. This has been NetGain, networking, encouragement, training. And I'll end with, since I didn't begin with an encouragement, I'll end with an encouragement, is just to Bart's example. Take the physical therapy route, not the painkiller route. Be willing to put the work in, be willing to do the small things consistently, and in that find the win. So this is NetGain, Bart and Evan. We out.
Weather, but you ain't gon' slip and fall with that. Why? Cause we snow fighters, we assaulting that. Get it, salting that. King me this salting rap. Clown brokers, end of the road. This a cul-de-sac. Blackout with white glove service. That's the coldest facts. Sparks flying from the start. It's a Goldberg match. Wild with the snow clouds running. We be on a mission. How